Sarah had dreamed of being a judge since she was a young girl. After graduating top of her class from law school, she worked hard as a public defender and then prosecutor, earning a reputation for integrity, sharp intellect, and fairness. At age 38, she was appointed to the county bench. Though demanding, Sarah found the work of a judge deeply meaningful. She aimed to make rulings that balanced justice with mercy. One case early on stood out: a 19-year-old from a troubled background convicted of armed robbery. Seeing potential for redemption, Sarah sentenced him to probation with mandatory counseling, despite objections. It was a controversial decision, but she believed in giving people second chances. Years passed happily and uneventfully until the day Sarah was approached by a member of a local gang. He told her she needed to release his brother from jail immediately and resign her judgeship. If she refused, they would harm her family. She gathered her composure and simply replied, "I'll have to consider your request." Inside, her mind was racing, but she knew not to provoke him. As soon as he left, she contacted the authorities. The police swiftly set up protection around her home, and the FBI began investigating the gang. The day the gang member approached Sarah, she was caught off guard. As he demanded she release his brother and resign, she gathered her composure and simply replied, "I'll have to consider your request." Inside, her mind was racing, but she knew not to provoke him. As soon as he left, she contacted the authorities. Police swiftly set up security around her home, and the FBI began investigating the gang. In the following months, the police maintained steady protection for Sarah and her family. She continued her work, trying not to be consumed by worry. But the threats weighed on her. 3 months after the incident, police told Sarah they had no arrests yet, but were pursuing leads. They said the immediate danger had passed. They assured Sarah she was safe, and that if anything came up, she should call them, feeling relieved. She continued her work as a judge. A week after the update, Sarah came home exhausted as she unlocked the door. She was alarmed to see a gang member waiting inside her house, adrenaline spiking. Sarah stayed calm. "What are you doing here?" she asked firmly. "You know what we want." He snarled, "This is your last warning." Sarah stood tall. "I do not respond to threats. Leave now before I call the police." He laughed coldly. "You'll pay for this," he said as he shoved past her out the door. The man's tone shifted. "Sit down," he ordered. Sarah hesitated, pulse racing. "I'm going to shave your hair." "So you understand our message clearly," he said, pulling out electric clippers. He forced Sarah into a chair and grabbed her hair. She pleaded with him to stop, but he powered on the buzzing shears. The man shaved off thick chunks of Sarah's blonde hair as she screamed and fought back. He shaved closer and closer and closer until all her hair was gone. Sarah sat bald and weeping as the last strands fell to the floor. "Quiet," the man demanded. "This is just a warning." He leaned in close. "You will release my brother from prison immediately," he commanded. Sarah continued crying silently, too shaken to respond. As the man slipped away, he turned back with a chilling threat. "If you call the police, there will be severe consequences." Alone, Sarah crumpled in despair. But through her anguish, her resolve grew. She would not cave to these criminals. Cleaning herself up, she weighed her options. Her integrity as a judge was on the line. She decided to discreetly contact the FBI. In the weeks following the attack, Sarah lived in silent terror of the gang's threats of retaliation if she spoke to police, but she persevered in her judicial duties, determined not to let evil win. Keeping up appearances before colleagues and court staff was a challenge. Inside, Sarah recoiled at the sight of her shorn head in the mirror each morning. She had to cover her anguish and fear. At night, sleep evaded her as she lay restless, alert to every outside sound. She jumped at shadows during the day. Her sanity felt like it was fraying, but Sarah refused to bend to the criminals. She maintained her reputation for being a stern but fair judge in court, keeping her turmoil carefully concealed. On the bench, Sarah handed down sentences and rulings with an uncompromising attitude. She was harsher than normal, which surprised some colleagues and attorneys, but it bolstered her fragile psyche. Meanwhile, the FBI was methodically building cases against the gang's leadership. Sarah cooperated discreetly, providing key insights while staying off the gang's radar. A year after her ordeal began, federal prosecutors won indictments against the gang members who had terrorized Sarah. At their trial, she testified with force and conviction, facing down her oppressors. Justice prevailed with stiff sentences for the criminals. While still scarred, Sarah emerged stronger for having conquered her fears. She continued as a judge for decades more, guiding others from darkness into light. A year after her ordeal began, federal prosecutors won indictments against the gang members who had terrorized Sarah. At their trial, she testified with strength and conviction, facing down her oppressors. Justice prevailed as the judge handed down long prison sentences for the criminals. Sarah finally felt a weight lift after facing her intimidators in court. But a month after the trial, as Sarah was recovering, her cell phone rang from an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A stern voice came over the line. "You may have put some of us away, but this isn't over." Sarah's blood turned to ice. It was one of the gang leaders' voices. She was sure of it. "We still have reach on the outside." The menacing voice continued. "Watch yourself," then just a click. Sarah stood paralyzed after the threatening call, phone slipping from her hand. The gang still posed a danger even with the convictions. Suddenly, her front door burst open. 2 men rushed in and grabbed Sarah before she could react. They forced her into a chair and powered up electric shears. Sarah cried and pleaded as they ruthlessly shaved her head again. "This will keep happening if you don't cooperate," one man growled. "You will always shave your head from now on," the other man leaned in menacingly. "And you will release those 2 prisoners we told you about immediately." They released Sarah, leaving her disfigured and broken once again. But deep down, her resolve was only growing stronger. She refused to give in to their demands, knowing she must uphold justice. Calling the FBI, Sarah reported the attack, giving details to aid their investigation. The convicted gang continued trying to terrorize her from behind bars, but Sarah persevered, taking precautions while not letting fear control her. She found inner courage to continue her judicial duties, relying on her principles. Her perseverance inspired others facing adversity. The criminals wanted Sarah to live in terror, but she was determined to keep darkness at bay with light. Decades later, Sarah was still serving as judge, guiding those through injustice. Proof that integrity and bravery together can defeat evil forces trying to corrupt justice.